Welcome to Module 2 in the Global Citizen Leadership Training Program called Fundamentals of Global Citizenship. The course is sponsored by the Global Citizens Initiative. My name is Ron Israel, Director of the Global Citizens Initiative and your guide for this course. My colleague, Professor Ash Hartwell, serves as our technical advisor in our use of active learning. Module 2 focuses on the issue of human rights. Human rights often are described as fundamental, indivisible, and interdependent rights which a person is entitled to simply because they are human. Historically, human rights were handed down by religious or moral authorities, and later by kings, queens, and other autocratic rulers, often in response to citizen demands. Today, most human rights derive their legitimacy from the social contracts that people make with their governments in democratic countries, and also by international declarations, agreements, and covenants. The core nature of human rights are grounded in respect for individual liberty, equality, and equity, and have remained constant over time. However, the ways in which human rights are applied can change according to movements in the political, economic, and social fabric of societies. Though human rights frameworks have existed within individual societies for millennia, the concept of an overarching human rights framework that includes all members of a global family is relatively new and still evolving. The extermination of millions of Jews, along with several other minority groups during World War II, made leaders around the world painfully aware of the urgent need for international cooperation to prevent such atrocities from being repeated. In 1948, this urgent need led to the establishment of the United Nations, the UN Commission on Human Rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which all countries have signed. The United Nations also has passed human rights conventions and treaties which deal with specific sets of human rights, such as the rights of children and the rights of people with disabilities. In addition, most national constitutions have some form of human rights provisions embedded in them. Here is a table where you can see a list of the leading international human rights declarations, conventions, and treaties that have been passed by the UN since World War II. How many of these have been ratified and implemented in your countries? Many experts say that there are three categories of basic human rights. First, civil and political rights, focused on the freedom to think what one wants, have free access to information, have the freedom to act and choose what to do, and have the freedom to join in political life. Second, there are social and economic rights that focus on providing social and economic security, protecting people's access to food, shelter, education, and health care. And third, there are environmental, cultural, and developmental rights which focus on the right to live in an environment free from pollution and the right to cultural, social, and economic development. There is the greatest amount of consensus and support for civil and political rights. However, in the last several years, efforts have been made to strengthen the support for global and social rights as well. The argument is made that it's no use having civil and political rights if you and your family don't have access to the essentials of food, clothing, and shelter needed to maintain a basic quality of life. In recent years, there also have been movements to develop declarations and/or conventions focused on contemporary human rights issues. For example, digital rights or access to internet broadband technology, and issues that protect the rights of lesbian, gay, and transgender populations, or LGBT rights. As of yet, there isn't universal consensus on either of these issues, but that may change over time. There are some global citizen advocates who urge an overall updating of the original Universal Declaration of Human Rights to reflect many of the more contemporary human rights issues that have emerged since. The main problem related to human rights agreements is the difficulties that the world has had in enforcing them. There is a long and shameful history of disrespect for and abuse of human rights on the part of sovereign states, religious institutions, corporations, and others. The major reasons for this compliance gap are, first, many UN member countries have still not signed important international human rights agreements. Many have signed these agreements, but have not followed through and ratified them. Secondly, countries which are signatories to human rights agreements and treaties often fail to put in place relevant, supportive national legislation. Third, multinational corporations have not been subject to prosecution for human rights violations, even though their actions affect millions of workers and consumers. However, in March 2011, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a set of guiding principles on business and human rights. The UN also has formed a global compact aimed at getting businesses to honor human rights principles. The compact has now been signed by over 10,000 businesses in more than 130 countries. Global citizens have an important role to play in helping to monitor the implementation of human rights norms and agreements, in advocating for the judicial treatment for those whose human rights have been violated, and educating their communities about the importance of protecting and enforcing agreed-upon human rights laws. Here are some examples of the roles that global citizens can play. First, global citizens can participate in the process of shadow reporting. A shadow report is information submitted by non-governmental organizations to the UN treaty monitoring bodies that address omissions, deficiencies, or inaccuracies in official government human rights reports. Global citizens affiliated with NGOs can submit shadow reports about human rights abuses in their countries. Secondly, global citizens can lead or participate in human rights education efforts. Human rights education promotes increased demand by citizens for the enforcement of human rights standards. It develops an understanding of everyone's common responsibility to human rights, to make human rights a reality. Third, global citizens can participate in human rights name and shame and boycott campaigns. Naming and shaming is a popular strategy to enforce international human rights norms and laws. Naming involves organizations publicizing a country's human rights violations and urging reform. Boycotts involve working with sympathetic governments, the media, and other key stakeholder groups to boycott an event linked with a human rights abuse issue. For a good example, see the recent international backlash against Russia's anti-gay propaganda law that took place against the backdrop of the 2014 Winter Olympics. It included boycotting the serving of Russian vodka by many bars around the world. Finally, global citizens can help with the process of implementing global human rights agreements by supporting local and international human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. As a participant in this course, please complete the following assignment during the 2-week period for the study of Module 2. Step 1. Conduct a global citizen human rights assessment in your country. Include in this assessment whether or not your country has signed and ratified the international human rights agreements listed in the table in this module. The extent to which such agreements are effectively being implemented by your country, the leading human rights abuses in your country, if you can cite data to support this finding, the obstacles to correcting these abuses, and how these obstacles can be addressed. Wherever possible, again, cite references to specific policies and/or programs and practices. Also, provide your recommendation, if any, for the content of new international human rights agreements you think might be appropriate, and the reasons why such agreements are needed. Step 2. Write a short summary of your Global Citizen Human Rights Assessment. Send this summary to program staff and your course partner by Friday of week 1 so that they can provide you with feedback before the week 2 module conference call. Step 3. Participate in an online discussion on Wednesday of week 2 with other course participants. Share your findings with others during this discussion. Be prepared to ask critical questions of other members of your participant group. Keep track of the similarities and differences between your assessment findings and those of the other participants. After the online group discussion and receiving any feedback from program staff and your course partner, make any revisions needed in your human rights assessment and insert the summary of this assessment in your course portfolio.